Let's face it, something feels off in the world. We're drowning in information, but starving for truth. Morality is now a matter of opinion, and evil, it's just a hashtag, until it isn't. And in this sea of confusion, we keep circling the same ancient question: why does evil exist? Carl Jung didn't just ask that question. He wrestled it into the pages of Aion, where he didn't point fingers outward, but turned the spotlight inward. What if evil isn't just a socio-political issue, but a spiritual one? And what if the Antichrist isn't coming out there, but is already growing in here, in our culture, our institutions, and our own psyches? This video is not for the faint of heart, because here, we're going to crack open the sacred and the profane, peel back the moral mask of modernity, and trace the fall of logos through Christ, the Antichrist, communism, and the erosion of human potential. We're diving deep into Jung's psychology, Nietzsche's fire, Christianity's promise, and the soul's revolt. This isn't Sunday school. It's psychological warfare. And if you're still clinging to the idea that everything happens for a reason, this will shake you to your bones. But stay with me, because buried in the rubble of broken ideologies, forgotten myths, and moral decay, there's a seed, a forgotten key, a spark of divine order waiting to be reawakened within you. If you've ever felt like you were meant for something more, but didn't know where to begin, this is where it starts. The descent into the shadow isn't the end. It's the beginning of resurrection. So tighten your grip. We're going in. Chapter 1. Logos and the problem of evil. There's a reason people say the world doesn't make sense anymore. It's because they've lost sight of the logos. In ancient thought, logos wasn't just a fancy term for word or speech. It was divine reason itself, the blueprint that held everything together. When chaos erupts, whether in global war, moral collapse, or inner turmoil, it's usually because we've abandoned this principle. Carl Jung pointed out that without this grounding, the psyche splits and evil emerges not just out there, but within. So the problem of evil, it's not just theological, it's deeply psychological. Christianity answers this dilemma with Christ, the embodiment of the logos, confronting evil not by force, but by bearing it. It's wild when you think about it. The greatest act of spiritual warfare wasn't a war, but a crucifixion. A man nailed to wood, bleeding truth into the ground, answering violence with forgiveness. That's not weakness. That's the kind of courage that shatters archetypes. Jung knew this image wasn't just religious. It was psychological alchemy, transforming suffering into meaning. But here's the kicker. People still suffer, still wrestle with evil, and often ask why a loving God allows it. Fair question. But what if the question itself is missing the point? Jung suggested that evil is not an external invader. It's part of the psychic totality. When unacknowledged, it festers. So logos isn't a magic shield. It's a compass. It doesn't remove suffering. It redeems it. Through awareness. Through integration. Through becoming whole. Take this into your daily life. Let's say you're overwhelmed, angry, maybe even full of quiet resentment. The temptation is to externalize it. Blame your boss, your partner, your childhood. But what if you stopped and asked, where have I lost contact with the logos? Is your life aligned with truth, order, and purpose? Or are you drifting in emotional entropy? One small ritual, like journaling your emotional triggers each night, can begin to restore that alignment. The road back to logos is paved with self-honesty. And here's the strange beauty of it. The deeper you walk into your own shadow, the more clearly you glimpse the light. That's why the story doesn't end with crucifixion. It pushes forward, whispering that death isn't final, and that maybe, just maybe, logos always rises again. But what happens when that resurrected truth meets its mirror opposite? What happens when humanity rejects the logos altogether? That's when the Antichrist enters the scene. Chapter 2. The Role of Christ and the Antichrist. Every story with a hero has a shadow, and Christianity's drama is no different. Christ, as the Logos incarnate, doesn't just teach goodness. He is the archetype of the integrated self, the divine blueprint of what humanity could be. His life reflects a pattern of spiritual maturity, confronting suffering, transcending ego, and embodying unconditional love. He didn't conquer Rome with armies, but with the force of truth. And that's exactly why his mirror, the Antichrist, is so dangerous. Because it's not a red monster with horns. It's a psychological force that mimics light while devouring order from within. Jung warned that the Antichrist isn't just an external figure. It's a symbol of psychic fragmentation, a rebellion against Logos. It emerges when society glorifies power without principle, pleasure without meaning, and innovation without wisdom. Sound familiar? We see its fingerprints in cultural trends that elevate image over truth, in historical narratives rewritten to erase sacred foundations. The Antichrist archetype thrives in times when the collective unconscious is untethered from spiritual roots. Think about it. When was the last time the media praised sacrifice, humility, or moral courage? Now compare that to how often you see chaos framed as freedom or selfishness reframed as empowerment. This isn't just bad philosophy, it's spiritual warfare. And the terrifying part, most people don't even notice. The Antichrist doesn't need to announce himself if he can seduce us into rejecting Christ from within. Logos is replaced with noise. Discipline is mocked. Faith is seen as weakness. This polarity plays out in personal lives too. Say someone gets betrayed. They have two paths: embody Christ and forgive, or embody the Antichrist and seek revenge. One aligns with Logos, the other with destruction. And no, it's not easy to choose the higher road. But that's exactly why it's heroic. As a practical exercise, start small. Each time you're wronged, pause and ask, what would the highest version of me do? That question alone can disarm your inner tyrant and reawaken your alignment with the Logos. Now here's the deeper twist. In a world increasingly hostile to structure and morality, how do we know which values to follow? Nietzsche said morality itself was a construct. So what happens when we pit Christ's compassion against the cold might of master morality? It's time we bring Nietzsche into the conversation. Chapter 3. Master Morality versus Slave Morality. Nietzsche didn't pull punches. He called out Christianity as a slave morality, a system, in his eyes, born from weakness, glorifying meekness, and demonizing strength. But Jung saw deeper. He recognized that what Nietzsche attacked wasn't Logos itself, but a distorted version of it, a morality that had lost its balance. Master morality values power, nobility, self-overcoming. Slave morality values humility, compassion, the dignity of the weak. But here's the kicker. Both contain truth, and both can be corrupted. In everyday life, this tension plays out in subtle ways. When someone achieves success, and we secretly resent them, that's slave morality whispering in our ear. When a leader crushes dissent in the name of order, that's master morality running amok. The danger isn't in choosing one over the other. It's in failing to recognize when either archetype takes the wheel unconsciously. Logos doesn't reject power or compassion. It integrates them into a higher synthesis. So what does that look like practically? It means embracing ambition without trampling others. It means being strong enough to say no, but also humble enough to admit when you're wrong. Take a look at your life. Are you holding yourself back under the guise of virtue? Or maybe justifying cruelty as tough love? Jung would say these are shadows of moral imbalance. The path of individuation demands we stop outsourcing our ethics and start embodying both the lion and the lamb. If you're striving for something, career success, personal transformation, even spiritual growth, you'll face this fork again and again. Do you step over others or lift them with you? Do you hide your brilliance out of fear of judgment? Or do you shine without arrogance? Here's a powerful journaling prompt. Where have I been proud of my strength? Where have I weaponized my weakness? That reflection alone can dissolve years of hidden hypocrisy. But now imagine this dilemma on a civilizational scale. What happens when an entire society leans too far into slave morality, fearing excellence, punishing strength, rewarding victimhood? Or when it embraces master morality, crushing the soul in pursuit of conquest? Somewhere in that chaos, a rebel rises, not to destroy, but to redeem. A revolutionary, a carpenter's son who challenged an empire. Let's talk about Christ, not as a priest, but as a radical. Chapter 4. Christ as a revolutionary. Most people picture Christ as gentle, meek, a lamb among wolves. But read between the lines, and you'll find a revolutionary with fire in his veins. He flipped tables in the temple, challenged religious elites, and spoke truth to Roman power without flinching. This wasn't just spiritual reform. It was a rebellion against the existing logos of domination. His weapon wasn't violence, but moral clarity. His power wasn't in numbers, but in uncompromising alignment with divine truth. He walked into the lion's den without armor, but his very presence unmasked the hypocrisy of empires. Rome couldn't understand him. Neither could many of his own people. The Messiah they wanted was a warrior king. The one they got was a servant who knelt to wash feet. Yet beneath that humility was a quiet defiance, a refusal to play the game of thrones. This is what made Christ dangerous. He didn't aim to rule over bodies, but to liberate souls. Logos, in this context, wasn't about control. It was about coherence, restoring order to a world drunk on power. Jung would say he embodied the self, fully integrated beyond shadow. Let's get real for a second. In today's world, the real rebels aren't the loudest voices online. They're the ones who refuse to trade their conscience for likes, who choose truth over comfort, who walk away from toxic systems, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Want to be radical? Start by refusing to lie, to yourself, to your boss, to your partner. Read The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Or go deeper. Reread the Gospels through the lens of revolution, not religion. What Christ modeled was an entirely new kind of heroism. Not Nietzsche's Übermensch, but something subtler and more powerful. A figure who could absorb the hatred of the world and still love it. That's not passive. That's nuclear strength. And it's why his image still burns through centuries of political distortion. The logos he carried wasn't for sale. He offered it freely and paid the price. But the story didn't end with his execution. It broke history in two and left us staring at an empty tomb. Now comes the part most people struggle with. What if the resurrection wasn't just metaphor, but a cosmic declaration that evil doesn't get the last word? What if faith isn't blind belief, but the courage to live as though resurrection is real? Let's talk about that next. Chapter 5. The Resurrection and Faith. If Christ had simply died, he would have been remembered as a martyr, a noble figure, sure, but ultimately defeated. But the claim of resurrection flips the script entirely. It doesn't just comfort the grieving. It redefines the whole narrative of suffering, evil, and redemption. The resurrection becomes the ultimate answer to the problem of evil, not by erasing pain, but by showing that even death, the great devourer, can be transcended. Jung understood this symbolically as the psyche's ability to regenerate, to rise anew after ego death, after breakdown. Christianity takes that symbol and dares to call it history. But let's be honest, It's a hard pill to swallow. Many today reject the literal resurrection, clinging instead to moral admiration for Jesus. That's safe, digestible, but it strips Christianity of its radical edge. Without resurrection, Logos doesn't triumph. It just fades into myth. Faith, then, isn't wishful thinking. It's a wager that truth can overcome evil. And it's tested not in temples, but in hospital rooms, courtrooms, therapy chairs, the places where chaos knocks on your door and dares you to believe in something higher. This kind of faith is active, not passive. It means showing up when everything in you wants to run. It means forgiving when revenge feels justified. It means loving when cynicism is easier. Here's something practical. Next time you're stuck in despair, don't numb it, confront it. Ask, what part of me is waiting to resurrect? Read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, a book that brings Logos into Auschwitz. Or watch Silence by Martin Scorsese and wrestle with doubt like a disciple in exile. The resurrection isn't just an event, it's an invitation, a call to rise beyond victimhood, beyond nihilism, beyond the narrative that this world is all there is. It tells you that your suffering matters, not because it's unique, but because it can be transformed. That's the twist. Logos isn't interested in comfort. It's interested in metamorphosis. But to transform, you have to want more than survival. You have to reach for meaning, even when it costs everything. And what gets in the way of that? Our instincts, our desires, our eros, that deep, raw current that can either pull us toward growth or drag us into ruin. So let's unpack that dance between Eros and Logos. Chapter 6. Eros and Logos in Human Behavior. Let's be real. Most of us are tugged by Eros far more than we'd like to admit. That primal desire, the longing for union, beauty, pleasure, it's not evil in itself. Eros is the spark of life. Without it, we'd be hollow. But without Logos to guide it, Eros turns wild, impulsive, and self-destructive. It becomes addiction, obsession, infatuation mistaken for love. Jung saw this clearly. The psyche splits when Eros isn't integrated. And society, it gets swept into collective chaos, worshipping feeling while starving reason. You see it everywhere. Marketing seduces you with dopamine. Social media algorithms exploit your need for connection. Even politics, once rooted in vision, has become erotically charged theater, rage porn for divided minds. Without Logos, Eros becomes a tyrant. But when balanced, these forces create life, love, art, creation. That's the key. Not repression, but conscious channeling. Logos doesn't kill Eros. It refines it. Like fire tempered by iron, passion guided by wisdom becomes power. Want to integrate this? Start with your impulses. Are they moving you toward truth or away from it? Journaling isn't just introspection. It's a battlefield between Logos and Eros. Practice stillness. Not silence, stillness. In meditation, let Eros rise, but don't chase it. Observe. Breathe. Let Logos speak beneath the noise. Books like The Sacred and the Profane by Mircea Eliade can expand your awareness of how the sacred and the sensual are always entangled. Relationships are the best training ground for this balance. When love becomes possession, when desire becomes demand, you know Eros has gone rogue. But when you listen deeply, speak honestly, and act with clarity, even when desire clouds your judgment, you're invoking Logos. It doesn't kill the thrill. It deepens it, like turning lust into devotion or ambition into purpose. The alchemy is real. And yet, when an entire culture begins to distrust Logos and glorify Eros, when order is mocked and desire becomes law, there's a shift, a vacuum, a spiritual vulnerability. That's when ideologies step in, promising justice, offering equality, but often delivering something much darker. Let's talk about that next. Communism, Marxism, and the fall of Logos. Chapter 7. The Decline of Logos. On paper, communism sounds noble: equality, justice, liberation from oppression. But history tells a darker tale. Jung would have called it a collective possession, a mass psychosis where the Logos was buried beneath ideology. Marxism, for all its intellectual appeal, strips the soul from the equation. It reduces human beings to economic units, society to class struggle, and morality to utility. Logos is replaced by resentment, and suddenly the pursuit of excellence becomes oppression. The revolutionary becomes the Antichrist in disguise, not by appearance, but by inversion of truth. When you remove transcendence, when there's no higher order, no divine Logos, then man becomes God. And let's be honest, we're not very good at playing that role. What begins as liberation often ends in gulags, purges, and the policing of thought. This isn't accidental. It's the natural outcome of systems that reject the spiritual dimension. Without Logos, Eros turns into violence, and power becomes the only language. You don't have to be a political activist to feel this erosion. It's in schools where objective truth is optional, in workplaces where competence is sacrificed for ideology, in online mobs where dissent is sin. This isn't just politics, it's metaphysical warfare. When Logos dies, so does dialogue. And in its place, we get slogans, tribalism, and digital witch hunts. The Antichrist doesn't need to destroy Christ. He just needs to counterfeit him and offer a religion without redemption. But here's where it gets interesting. Communism borrows its moral firepower from Christianity. It promises paradise, equality, justice. But it divorces these from Logos, from grace, from personal responsibility. It becomes a hollow echo, demanding what Christ offered freely. That's why it fails, not just economically, but spiritually. And yet, the longing underneath remains real. People still crave meaning, purpose, unity. They just don't know where to find it. So where do we go from here? Is it possible to reclaim those ideals without falling into tyranny or delusion? What if the answer isn't to discard ambition, but to elevate it, to reawaken the heroic, the transcendent, the true? Let's explore that next and unlock the forgotten power of human potential. Chapter 8. Human Potential and the Struggle for Excellence. Human beings weren't made for mediocrity. Deep down, we all feel it, that ache to become more than what we are. But in a world where striving is often mistaken for arrogance, excellence becomes taboo. Jung understood this tension as the struggle between the self and the collective unconscious. When we suppress our higher nature to fit in, we betray the Logos within us. And when society punishes greatness in the name of equality, it breeds resentment instead of inspiration. The solution isn't conformity, it's awakening. Christ didn't die to make us passive. He showed us what one life in full alignment with Logos could do: disrupt an empire, redefine morality, and open the gates of the soul. Nietzsche, on the other hand, dared us to rise beyond herd instinct, to embrace the will to power not as domination, but as self-overcoming. Two paths, seemingly opposed, yet both urging us toward the same truth: transcendence. The enemy isn't ambition, it's unconsciousness. It's the refusal to grow because comfort feels safer than destiny. So what can you do with this fire inside you? Start by confronting the places where you've settled. Where have you traded vision for validation? Where have you chosen ease over excellence? Read The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield if you need a slap of creative discipline. Or dive into Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson to understand how chaos and order play out in your personal myth. These aren't just intellectual exercises, they're calls to arms. This isn't about hustle culture or toxic positivity. It's about reclaiming your divine potential the part of you made in the image of Logos. Whether that means writing your book, healing your family line, starting a mission-driven business, or just becoming someone your younger self will be proud of, the path is clear. Not easy, not popular, but clear. Excellence is spiritual warfare, and the battlefield is your daily choices. But here's the haunting truth. When this potential is ignored, when it's suppressed by systems or denied by the self, it doesn't disappear. It festers. It turns inward. And that's when the shadows rise, both personally and collectively. We've come full circle now. Back to the question we began with. How do we confront evil? Not out there, but within. Let's pull the thread all the way back to the beginning. Conclusion. You are a living battleground between order and chaos. So here we are. After walking through the archetypes of Christ and the Antichrist, the fall of Logos, the seductive promises of communism, and the divine tension between Eros and Logos, you're left with one brutal, beautiful truth. You're not powerless. You're not a product of your trauma, your society, or your algorithm. You are a living battleground between order and chaos, meaning and nihilism, light and shadow. And what you choose to do with that tension, that's where real transformation begins. Not in theories, but in the micro decisions you make every single day. The question isn't, is evil out there? The question is, how are you confronting it in here? Are you allowing mediocrity to take root in your heart? Are you playing small because the culture tells you ambition is arrogance? Are you scrolling through meaninglessness instead of writing your own story? Jung would say, the shadow you ignore owns you, but the shadow you integrate, that becomes your power. So what are you waiting for? Pick up that book you've avoided. Have that hard conversation. Reclaim the sacred in your daily life. You don't need permission. You need courage. And hey, don't do it alone. If this message hit you somewhere deep, it means you're ready. Ready to dive deeper. Ready to confront your shadow. Ready to rediscover the Logos inside you. So hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay with us as we uncover the lost wisdom of Jung, the sacred patterns of Christianity, and the power of myth in a world that's forgotten its soul. Because this journey is just beginning, and I promise you don't want to miss what's next.